Thank you very much for coming. So at this event, we're going to hear from experts working on issues of trans people's rights across different contexts. They are going to draw on good practices and lessons learned from national level cases, illustrate the important role of civil society in advocating for change, and explore how the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, agreed to by all member states, can be used in mobilising for change. A central commitment within that agenda is, of course, to leave no one behind. Taking place within the 2018 Trans Advocacy Week at the UN, this side event aims to contribute to existing efforts to promote and strengthen trans human rights across the globe. The event is also an opportunity for us to develop synergies for an UNRISD project on safeguarding trans people's rights. If you would like to be included in this project's communication network and receive occasional updates about the research and results, please sign up on the sheets being passed around the room. We also coordinate a platform that many of you will be aware of on social protection and human rights, which collates and provides resources on rights-based approaches to social protection in different sectors. If you'd like to know more about that, please see my colleague Doreen just at the end there. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Silvan Agius, Director of the Human Rights and Integration Department at the Ministry for European Affairs and Equality in the Republic of Malta, and Silvan is going to give introductory remarks. Then we're going to hear from our panellists, and then if we're all on time, we should have about 25 or 30 minutes at the end for discussion or for comments from the audience or for questions for our panellists. Silvan, let me pass the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Firstly, I would like to thank the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development for organizing this important event and for extending an invitation to the Government of Malta to provide an outline of the work carried out to ensure that trans and gender diverse persons are equally included in front of the law and society. While Malta today tops the European Index on Legal and Policy Equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and gender diverse persons, this was not always the case. Indeed, until little more than 5 years ago, Joanne Cassar, a trans woman, was left fighting for her right to marry her different-sex partner in front of the European Court of Human Rights. This, despite the fact that the right of trans persons to marry their different-sex partners was already established by the same court 11 years prior in the case of Goodwin and Dye versus the UK. On a positive note, though, the developments of that case were prominently reported in the media, and they informed the population of the dire situation of trans people in Malta at the time. In the electoral campaign that took place in 2013, trans issues, as with other LGBTIQ issues, featured prominently. This brought about the sense that progress had to come to Malta in this area as well. Following a change of government, an out-of-court settlement was reached with Joanne Cassar, and she dropped her case. According to the settlement, she received financial compensation while the law was changed to remove the barrier for trans persons to marry their different-sex partners. This happened during the first month of the new government's mandate, sending out a clear signal that change was indeed in the air. That same year, Joanne Cassar went on to receive the Juhur Republika Award, which award is reserved to those persons who have demonstrated exceptional merit in the service of Malta. Meanwhile, government set up an LGBTIQ consultative council. This council consists of representatives of LGBTIQ civil society organizations, including those focusing on human rights issues, dedicated sections within political parties, Christian groups, including parents of LGBTIQ persons, and others with a narrower focus, such as gender diversity, amongst others. This consultative council is instrumental, as it was provided with the mandate to propose legislative and policy development directly to government. Indeed, this Council develops and proposes a number of bills that were adopted by the government following the parliamentary process. I cannot emphasize enough how important the structure is. This is because it provides LGBTIQ civil society with direct contact with government and the ability to formulate policy in a way that works for the wider LGBTIQ community. This partnership between government and LGBTIQ civil society explains why the Malta that had a hard time recognizing rights of a trans woman to marry has now shifted in a diametrically opposed direction and is doing its utmost to ensure equality for all, including all the subdivisions within LGBTIQ. So what is it that Malta adopted in the past 5 years, and how is it to the benefit of trans and gender diverse persons? For starters, the ground of sexual orientation and gender identity were included in the Constitution's anti-discrimination article, sending out a clear signal that all discrimination or lack of recognition of LGBTIQ persons in law and policy had to be removed. A principle that ensued from this development was that all new legislation that is progressed has to take note of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics concerns, and where necessary, specific articles or sub-articles are included to address specific realities. However, when this is the case, no express reference to LGBTIQ persons are included in the provisions, as they are always formulated in such a way as to include all sexual orientations, gender identities, gender expressions, and sex characteristics. Said differently, all persons are equal and none are more equal than others. To address the various human rights issues at stake, specific to trans, gender diverse, and intersex persons, the Gender Identity, Gender Expression, and Sex Characteristics Act was adopted in 2015. This law establishes that every person's rights to their gender identity and bodily integrity. This means that all citizens of Malta have the right to the recognition of their gender identity, the free development of their person according to their gender identity, be treated according to their gender identity and to be identified in that way in the documents providing their identity therein, and their bodily integrity and physical autonomy. An official change of documents takes a maximum period of 1 month and is based on a self-declaration of one's gender identity and preferred name in front of the notary. While this procedure is fairly simple and has already been acceded to by around 100 trans persons, no case of wrongful use of this right were ever reported. No proof of a surgical procedure for total or partial genital reassignment, hormonal therapies, or any other psychiatric, psychological, or medical treatment to make use of the right to gender identity are required. Importantly, a change of legal gender does not impinge on existing rights and obligations that the person had prior to the change of legal gender, including a person's rights, relationships, and obligations arising out of parenthood or marriage, the person's rights arising out of succession, and any obligations toward third parties that were acquired prior to the change of gender. Importantly, this law caters for adults and minors alike. Amongst the additional rights that this law provides, parents have the ability to leave their newborn baby's gender open on birth certificates until the gender identity of the offspring is established. Persons who change their legal gender have the ability to change all other official documents to include a new name and gender, and privacy is to be guaranteed at all times. The law also recognizes any changes to the legal gender of non-Maltese persons in their home country, and it introduces protection against unconsented and medically unnecessary interventions on the sex characteristics of intersex infants. In 2016, 2 additional laws were introduced. The first to criminalize conversion practices and affirm that all sexual orientations, gender identities, and gender expressions are to be considered equal in front of the law, while the second introduces the principle of depathologization on all these grounds when accessing any service, including healthcare. Additionally, this law recognizes the lived gender of non-Maltese persons in detention, such as prison, where, despite the fact that their documents from the home country may indicate a different gender, the Maltese authorities would keep detainees in the appropriate gender section. Clearly, these legal developments had to be followed up by a number of policies. Amongst others, the Ministry for Education introduced horizontal guidelines on the recognition of gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics in schools. Similarly, the Correctional Facilities Authorities introduced a policy for the recognition of transgender, diverse, and intersex inmates according to their gender. Government introduced a gender-neutral toilet policy that was extended to all ministries, the law courts, and parliament, while most government forms now allow for other genders to be indicated besides the usual M and F. Last year, Malta also introduced the possibility to opt for an X marker on one's identity card and passport, while earlier this year a new entry referring to gender identity and sex characteristics related conditions was added to the Social Security Act to include gender identity and sex characteristics related health care in the National Health Service. A national consultation regarding the right protocol to address this sector was subsequently carried out to ensure that the selected approach adequately meets the needs of the target group. Further plans include the setting up of a dedicated office to continue to address any barriers that may still exist in Maltese society for the full inclusion of LGBTIQ persons, which we may be able to report on in future events. To conclude, the European Eurobarometer survey that was published in October 2015 found that in the 3-year period between 2012 and 2015, when Malta was in the midst of a discussion on the introduction of dedicated legislation regarding gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics, the percentage of people that indicated that they were totally comfortable with a trans person occupying the highest elected position jumped up by 17%, while the percentage of persons who indicated that they were totally uncomfortable diminished by 20%. This was the greatest change in this regard across the European Union and should serve as a clear proof that when political will meets civil society know-how, much change can take place, even in a brief period of time. Our experience also shows that the turnarounds on the recognition and inclusion of trans and gender diverse persons in society can happen and can be managed successfully. Thank you.